Our first speaker is Dr. Andrew Racine, who will present on achieving social justice. Dr. Racine is a Systems Senior Vice President and Chief Medical Officer of the Montefiore Health System and Professor of Clinical Pediatrics at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx, New York. He holds a position as Research Associate as the National Bureau of Economic Research, where he has conducted research on the economic influence of child health status outcomes. In 2013, Dr. Racine chaired the AAP work group on poverty and child health. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Racine.
Good morning. You will forgive me if I decline to discuss the issue of achieving social justice, as I'm scheduled to do, by delving into considerations of homelessness, school expulsion, poverty, food insecurity, adverse child experiences, and toxic stress in childhood. In my estimation, to do that would be to put the cart before the horse, whereas I would prefer to focus on the horse. Let me attempt to address a simple question. The title of this talk implies that we already know the answer to it, and perhaps we do. But it may be that's just because it's easier for us to assume that there is a horse before this cart than to take the time to reason our way to that conclusion. The foundational question that I'd like to explore, the horse, is whether we can consider pediatricians' provision of medical care to poor children as an act of social justice. To answer this question, we have to begin with what we mean by the term social justice, and it is toward that end, toward a better understanding of that term, that I would like us to turn our attention. Absent such an understanding, it will be difficult to reason whether the provision of health care to poor children is or is not an instrument to achieve such an end. Now, it is altogether appropriate that we in the American Academy of Pediatrics should wrestle with the question of whether social justice is like as it pertains to children. For, as Pip, the protagonist in Charles Dickens' monumental work, Great Expectations, remarks in the beginning of that story, in the little world in which children have their existence, there is nothing so finely perceived and finely felt as injustice. It may be only small injustice that the child is exposed to, but the child is small, and its world is small. That being the case, as stewards of children's health, we would do well to at least consider what we mean by justice and its absence in the lives of children and in their future selves. Justice inhabits that realm of thought that governs what people are owed, what they are due. It is the idea that individuals should receive that to which merit entitles them. No more, no less. Decisions about what is owed and to whom play out both in interactions among individuals as well as in the formation of institutions of government. For the pigment of justice colors both the micro and the macro tableau of human relations. Now, whether we focus our inquiry on the level of the individual or the level of the state, there are certain features that remain central to the very idea of justice. These are the notions of proportionality, intentionality, and merit. Let's consider them in order. First, proportionality. It's not by happenstance that the graphic representation of justice often involves the depiction of a scale, a balance. If by way of someone's actions, one individual receives more than that he or she deserves, while another individual is deprived what is owed to them, the demands of justice require a redistribution, such that the proportionality between the instigator of the act and its victim is restored. The balance is renewed. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It is why, moreover, that Aristotle, in seeking to summarize his thinking in this regard, wrote, "This, then, is what the just is, the proportional." Now, proportionality alone, however, is not sufficient to mark an act as being just. Just as disproportionality by itself cannot connote injustice. Many calamitous events occur in the world, but not all of them are unjust. Witness the recent hurricane that occurred in Haiti at the beginning of this month. It resulted in the deaths of hundreds of innocent individuals. It devastated entire communities. Yet these dreadful events, in and of themselves, although visited disproportionately upon the citizens of Haiti, cannot be considered unjust. Disastrous? Yes. Tragic? Absolutely. But they are consequent to a set of indifferent natural forces, not the result of an intentional act by someone either acting alone or in concert with others. They cannot, therefore, be considered unjust. A landscape barren of agency, neither justice nor injustice is to be found. Similarly, if a poor elderly widow were to happen upon a winning lottery ticket, this is certainly an outcome to be celebrated, but it would be incorrect for us to describe the occurrence as just. Chance cannot deliver justice any more than it can generate virtue. Only the intentional act of an individual or a group of individuals organized as a community can do that. Therefore, neither the unjust act nor its restitution can be accomplished simply by accident. It must be considered only through the intent of the agents that have affected these outcomes. Finally, there's the issue of merit. I gave an example a moment ago of an instance where one individual received more than they were due, while another was deprived of what was owed to them. What the scenario left unaddressed, however, resides at the very heart of the issue, which is how we might know who is owed what, and therefore who had been unjustly deprived of what was due to them. Here, once again, the classics may provide us with something of a guide. The basic idea of justice among the ancient Greeks was linked to the belief that all elements that make up the world, including human beings, have certain purposes or meanings associated with them. This aspect of their being was referred to as their telos. And justice was said to occur when things in the world were apportioned to individuals by virtue of their telos, their moral worth. And this brings us to the nub of it. The challenge of discerning what this worth is constitutes the crux of our difficulty in arguing about justice. So let's consider an example that is offered by Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, in his treatise, The Idea of Justice. Sen presents us with the following scenario. We are asked to decide who, among 3 children, should be given a flute, which has become the object of disagreement among them. Anne claims that it is she who should receive the instrument, as she is the only one among the 3 who knows how to play it and can therefore produce music from it. Getting back to the notion of telos, this would appeal to the idea that the very purpose of a flute is to make music. And Anne, being the only child who can affect this outcome, should be awarded the flute. But Bob, the second of the 3 children, contends that it is he, rather than Anne, who deserves the flute, for he is the poorest of the 3 children and has no other toys to play with whatsoever. Finally, Carla objects, since, as she rightly points out, she worked for months to produce this flute with her own materials and her own hard work, and that therefore it is she who should be allowed to keep the instrument of her own fashioning. What principles can help us decide among these competing notions of the just distribution of this flute? Well, in the second book of the Republic, Socrates proposes to Glaucon that rather than proceed directly to a consideration of justice at the level of the individual, why not begin with notions of justice at the level of the state? If we can agree upon those principles, perhaps it will be somewhat easier to see how justice might be administered at the level of the individual. Not one to argue or to put myself in the position of arguing with Socrates. Let's try that here. The responsibility of the state to deliver justice, a very old notion in Western thought, dating back at least as far as Plato. Since the Enlightenment, our notion of state justice, in conformance with the principle of intentionality, begins with a deliberate agreement among individuals. The idea is that when gathered together for a common purpose, individuals agree, or would presume to agree, upon a set of governing principles, a kind of compact or a social contract. The influence of contractarian justice is evident in the preamble of our own Constitution, where, when defining the reason for composing the document, the framers began with the assertion that it was to create a government, but the first obligation of that union was to establish justice. They wrote, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America." The establishment of justice is given primacy in the list of reasons for which this document was desirable. Although we know from the living execution of articles of this document just how elusive the establishment of justice has proven to be. In our own time, one of the most thoughtful treatments of this idea of contractarian justice can be found in the writings of John Rawls, this man, the late professor of philosophy at Harvard. In A Theory of Justice, Rawls does not begin from an actual contract among individuals. Rather, he imagines an ideal contract that would take place under very specific circumstances. He then reasons that the application of the rules resulting from that type of contract would produce a set of social arrangements by which individuals would be accorded justice. It's all rather simple, really. Set rules according to a specific procedure, live by those rules, and achieve justice. And what exactly are those specific considerations? Well, in the first place, Rawls wants us to assume that the individuals who would agree to enter into this ideal contract are self-interested and risk-averse, which is to say, the ideal contract would not depend upon people preferentially wanting to look after the welfare of others, nor would it require a large leap of faith of some kind. Aside from these temperamental predispositions, Rawls stipulates that the individuals would have to agree to the principles governing their association without knowing anything about their own characteristics within the society that would live by these rules. They do not know, when considering the terms of this contract, if they would be male or female, rich or poor, whether they would be Christian or Muslim, whether they would be black or white, well-educated or without any formal training. They would not know if they would be tall or short, gay or straight, sickly or robust. They would not know if they were destined to inherit a great fortune or to write the great American novel. In short, they would be behind a veil of ignorance regarding the contingent aspects of their lives. In such a position, what Rawls refers to as the original position, he believes individuals would agree to two basic principles. One that would govern political associations among citizens in the state, and the second that would apply to the distribution of income and wealth, authority and status in the society. The first principle is that each person is entitled to equal right to the most extensive basic liberty compatible with similar liberty for others. Liberties such as the right to vote and to hold public office, the right of free speech and assembly, the right to be immune from arbitrary arrest or unlawful search, etc. The second principle is that all primary social goods, liberty and opportunity, income and wealth, and the bases of self-respect, are to be distributed equally unless an unequal distribution of any of these goods is to the advantage of the least favored. In this way, it is possible, for example, that Bill Gates would make a lot more money than a school teacher, but only if that income discrepancy redounds to the benefit of the least well-off among us. The underlying idea behind this idea of social contract is that all the realized attributes that we enjoy in the world, our genetic endowment, our propensity for hard work, our parental support structure, the schools we attend, the physical environment, the historical and cultural landscape we inhabit, all of this is in some very real sense completely arbitrary, so that when it comes to the question of who is owed what with respect to primary social goods, none of it should matter, since merit or moral worth is not, cannot be contingent upon chance. Luck cannot be the foundational element upon which to construct an edifice of merit, nor to decide in a just framework what is owed and to whom. So what are children owed? Good health and the means to attain it must surely be counted among what Rawls would refer to as primary social goods, if for no other reason than the enjoyment of other social goods is contingent upon a threshold level of good health, without which the utility of other social goods is significantly compromised. So as a primary social good, and in accordance with the notions of proportionality and merit, the dictates of justice would imply that we accord to all children an equal measure of the inputs to good health. These include, as we know, adequate nutrition, good genetic endowment, educational opportunities, safe environments, clean air, clean water, and plenty of play. Poor children, through purely contingent circumstances over which they have no control, have suffered a disproportionately small attribution of many of these elements, and some of them are beyond our ability to influence intentionally. Returning to the idea that justice involves balance and proportion, the requirements of justice in this sense would favor a redress of this imbalance. Pediatricians work towards redressing this imbalance when we turn our efforts toward the provision of health care for poor children. What has happened in recent years, however, is that we've been asked as health professionals to extend our scope well beyond the provision of health care services per se, and to focus our efforts on the other inputs to good health that are traditionally the purview of others in our society. Should we be asked to do this, to screen for nutritional inadequacy or housing insecurity, to inquire about traumatic experiences or environmental toxins that threaten our patients, to work toward a more global redressing of the disproportionate burdens to which poor children are subject? I would argue that the answer to this question is yes. In our traditional roles as pediatricians, we have been given a disproportionate share of society's advantages in income, in status, in power, and in privilege. We are accorded deference to our opinions, and we receive advantages not only for ourselves, but for our families and for our own children. By a Rawlsian criteria, these inequalities are themselves justified, but only if they were down to the benefit of the least advantaged among us. It would therefore be my argument that in keeping with intentionality and proportionality, and in merit, and in concert with well-recognized principles of social justice, we have that rare opportunity to live our day-to-day professional lives in the service of fairness and in a just cause. It is not given to everyone to lead a professional life that is so designed. It is why many of us entered this profession to begin with. And there is no group, nor any community, so well-suited, so ably positioned to achieve this goal. So, is the provision of medical care to poor children an act of social justice? You're damn right it is. So let us go forth from this convention with a renewed commitment, secure in the knowledge that as pediatricians in this world, the work of justice for children must truly be our own. Thank you.